Alright, hello everyone. Since the World Cup is starting in a few days actually, on Wednesday actually is the first match of the tournament, I thought it would be pretty nice if I just did a preview to help those who aren't really in the community, or you just want to know what's happening. So I'm just gonna go over each team alphabetically and break down just very briefly just a preview on each of the players and the team overall. And just a disclaimer, these are my personal opinions, so of course feel free to disagree. And also, to avoid spoiling someone's strat or playstyle that maybe they intended to keep a secret, I will try to be as vague as possible when talking about playstyles and compositions. For example, I won't expose which style they made, like chain, no mash, or hybrid, what keys they like to play, and etc. I'm not sure if I would know something that the general public does not know, so I will do this just as a security measure. Well, security measure, just to be safe, And I would like to clarify first that all of these teams are grouped into one of four seed groups: seed 1, seed 2, seed 3, seed 4, with seed 1 being the strongest and seed 4 being the weakest. So as we have 16 teams here, um, there will be 4 teams in each seed group. I would also just like to mention that the format of every match except for the grand finals is a best of 3. That's why even if one team has a really strong individual player, if the rest of the players are not perceived to be that strong, then they will be rated as weaker. Anyway, let's get started. First off, we have Benelux, and Benelux is a combination of Belgium, Netherlands, and Luxembourg. And actually, there was a Team Netherlands before in the previous World Cup, but KKO is actually the only remaining member of that previous team. And so the team is made up of KKO, Kireo, Nayel, Noxin, and Wawa. Sorry if I'm butchering these names. I'll probably be butchering some of the other names as well. I apologize for that. So basically, this team is all about Noxin. Noxin is the ace. She has been pretty standout in the past. I mean, she has been pretty good, pretty decent results, quite high level, I would say. But she has also been quite inactive, so not sure how strong she really is now. Kiryu is it's probably like the second strongest member here. He But the thing is, he has never really popped off in any tournaments. Never been a standout player, so I don't really think he can challenge a lot of the players in this World Cup, although I would be happy to be proven wrong. Meanwhile, Wawa and Nayel are completely unknown. I have no idea. I don't think they have joined any tournaments, at least no major tournaments, so their strength is unknown, and KKO has been inactive for a really long time. Since the end of the previous World Cup, he played for quite some time, but I think over the past year, he hasn't been playing that much. So, in general, Benelux is generally unknown strength, but they are still worth fearing due to Noxin and perhaps Kiryu as well. Next up, we have Brazil. Brazil is a Seed 2 team. Oh, I'm sorry. Benelux, I forgot to mention, is a Seed 4 team. And Brazil, in the previous World Cup, was actually top 4, so they were pretty strong back then. And I think they're still pretty strong now. Although for maybe a different reason, I'm not sure. But basically, from the previous World Cup, Hiki and Panda are still here. And Hiki and Panda, both of them are established players internationally. They have performed pretty well. Nicolau and JPBB often play against overseas players as well, and they also often join international tournaments, just like Hiki and Panda. And Nicolau, especially, personally, I think I would watch out for him because of his recent results in friendlies. He's been grinding a lot. and I think his level has gone up significantly. He might even be the strongest player in Brazil, who knows? I don't know. Yep, however, is I would say is relatively weaker than the rest. Has not been very high leveled compared to the rest, of course, which says a lot because they're all pretty strong. But I think what Brazil has over a lot of the other teams here is that they have very interesting and very off-meta playstyles. They play quite unorthodox with strange team composition sometimes, and they're very creative. Uh, but at the same time, people don't really know how good they are because they have their own tournaments in Brazil. Anyway, so that's Brazil. I don't think they are favored to win the tournament. Maybe they can make it to the semifinals, but I don't think they can make it to the grand finals, if I'm being honest. Sorry, all the Brazilians out there. And next, we have Bulgaria. Bulgaria is a C3 team, and it's made up of Caleb, Gabo, Horito, Krizo, and Yabususa. Now, Yabususa was K-Chris in the past, I believe, and Caleb, Krizo, and Yabususa were from the previous Bulgaria team last World Cup. And they actually pulled off some pretty neat surprises back then. However, now, I do think Bulgaria is kind of like a one-man show, and that man is Caleb. Caleb is very strong. He has been a top player for, I don't know, countless years, and he's also known for his really like crazy off-meta picks. Like, he will pull out something that no one has seen before, and no one knows how to play against it, and so he's a really fun player to watch. He has a pretty unique playstyle, and everyone should keep an eye out for him. Krizo was not ex, but Krizo used to be a pretty strong player. Performed pretty well at that one tournament, I remember. Surprised quite a lot of people, but he has been quite inactive for some time, so I'm not sure if his level has been maintained, if it's gone up, it's gone down. And Yabusosa I believe, has also not played in a very long time. And Gabo and Horito I don't really know much about, and so basically all their chances lie on Caleb, and well, let's see if the other members can also pull off some surprise wins against their opponents in the group stages. I think they have a chance to get out of group stages, but I wouldn't really count on it. Next up we have China, and China is really interesting because their current level is mostly unknown due to a lack of presence in international communities, in international tourneys, because they often like to play within their own community, or they will play in the Japanese drafts, but they rarely mingle and play against the European or their European counterparts. But arguably they are the strongest second seed, maybe even worthy of seed 1. And it's simply because of their history. I mean, everybody knows how strong Dia is. He's just respected by many, agreed to be extremely strong. And China, in the previous World Cup, they lost to Japan, unfortunately, in the quarterfinals, and maybe they could have made it further had they had a better draw during the playoffs. But anyway, basically the only one that the international community knows how good they are exactly is Matcha, because Matcha plays a lot in international tournaments and against European players, and especially Matcha popped off at God Impact. I believe he finished top 3, and in fact in that same tournament, Chuck, who barely failed to qualify to China in the Chinese qualifiers. He also popped off with matcha, and he beat a lot of really noteworthy players in that tournament. And the fact that he failed to qualify for this tournament, for this roster, could show just how stacked and strong the rest of the players are. And basically they have a very distinct playstyle. China is, their players are very aggressive, and yet they are also very methodical. It's actually quite beautiful to watch because you don't really see it anywhere else, honestly. And we've talked about Dia already. Then there's Kiara, who he's a hit or miss. He has very high highs and very low lows, so depends on which Kiara is going to come out the day on match day. Suzushina he played in the previous World Cup, but hasn't shown up in international tournaments that much, actually, if at all. So it's quite unknown how good he is, although the fact that he's on this roster, I mean, the fact that anyone is on this roster means that they are really, really strong. Memex is probably the most unknown player in this roster. I don't think anybody really knows about him, honestly, but of course he must be really strong as well. And the problem with China is that they seem to have a mental block against Japanese players. They don't really have good results against Japan in general, against Japanese players, but their skill level, in my personal opinion, is around the same. Maybe they're slightly weaker, but that's about it. So if they can overcome that mental block, I actually think they are a dark horse to win the whole tournament. They have the potential to do it. Then next up we have DACH, DACH, not sure how to pronounce it properly, but yeah, it's Germany, Switzerland, and Austria. So we have Mirozaki as the captain, Dani, Haku, Kaiser, and Skipper. The main core probably is Dani, Haku, and Skipper. These three, honestly, I think they can make it really far, as each of these players are very highly skilled. And if you include the whole team has very diverse playstyles. I think they all play quite differently from each other, in my personal opinion, from my experience. And I think the superstar of this team is actually Dani. Dani is very highly respected, but he has not been active lately, so it's kind of a question mark how good he is now. And Haku is kind of like Caleb. Haku has been at the top has been a top player for a long time, basically, and even now he still puts up some really good results, placing high in most tournaments he joins. So he's definitely an opponent to be feared, can go toe-to-toe with the very best. Mirozaki and Kaiser, meanwhile, while not at the level of the other three, of the core three that I mentioned, I think they can still match many of the other Seed 2 players. I forgot to clarify that Dutch is Seed 1. I do think they are still not favorites to win the whole tournament, but I think it's a safe bet to say that they will reach the semifinals, maybe even the finals. Next up, we have Eastern Europe, and I think these guys are very underrated. Even though Kemal and Katalin have not been very active in tournaments, they still quite respectable players. Their level is around mid to mid-higher, and Gamma, just like Nicolau I've mentioned, I think shows a lot of potential. He's been grinding a lot in friendlies with pretty good results, and so I think specifically Gamma is worth keeping an eye out for. And in my opinion, they are the strongest. They could be the strongest Seed 4 team, as they are a Seed 4 team. Moving on, we have France, Seed 1. And France are the runner-ups from the last World Cup, and from that team, there was Matthews and Nath. But they're not actually, in my opinion, the strongest members of France. It's actually Vivi, Alexis, and Azik. And as of recently, definitely Alexis and Azik, because Alexis and Azik are probably considered one of the best players in the world. They have beaten the best Japanese players on numerous occasions before, and they both have many major wins under their belts. Like individually, they're extremely strong. And Vivi was actually kind of the same in the past, but he has been quite inactive, I've heard, as of recently, so it's kind of a question mark as well, kind of like Dani. How strong are they right now? Comparatively to these three, Matthews is probably not as strong, but that says a lot given how strong they already are. And he also plays quite differently from the rest of these players actually. So it's quite interesting to see it, as he could be considered like an older generation, an old player together with Nath. And Nath, on the other hand, is like a wild card, joker card, if you may. He was arguably the strongest French player in the previous World Cup, and he's kind of like the godfather of French strikers. But he's kind of inactive. He's been quite inactive for a very long time, so not sure what his current level is. And what I mean by the godfather of French strikers is that you can see his playstyle in the gameplay of most top French players, and it's quite distinct from other regions. So I mentioned that China was aggressive but controlled, so if China is controlled aggression, France is kind of like aggressive aggression, like they just go all out. So it's actually quite entertaining to watch. It's very, very skill based, and in my opinion, actually France are the favorites to win. I think if they meet in the finals, France will beat Japan. Like this roster, especially with Alexis and Azik, they are quite unstoppable. Next up we have Italy, a Seed 2 team, and we have Filo, Aron, Giovic, Giu, and Marinucci. And Filo is kind of a hit or miss actually. He could go toe to toe against the best or lose to the most random of people. So yeah, he's kind of like Chiara in that sense. You never know what you're gonna get with Filo. And Aron, on the other hand, is less volatile, but he's had lower highs than Filo in my personal opinion from what I've seen. Giu and Giovic have a style that's quite different from Filo and Aron, which is quite interesting given they all play together. But also the style of Giovic and Giu is basically the style that is adopted by everyone else in Italy, so you could say Filo and Aron are the outliers. But the thing is, neither have really made their mark in major tournaments. Marinucci is relatively more unknown than the rest. Honestly, I would expect him to just be on the bench. What I've seen from results in friendlies. Because of all of that, I would say that they are actually the weakest second seed team. But even then, there are still no slouches in any way. Filo can just show up and maybe beat Alexis. Who knows? Could happen. And then we have Japan, the Seed 1 team, the defending champions, favored by many to win again, to defend their title. And in my opinion, while they are still really strong, many players around the world, especially in the French-speaking community, they have caught up to the Japanese. We have Parali, AS, Infi, Mia, and Raufuro. Parali is probably the best player in the world currently, with a nearly flawless record in majors this year so far. I think he's only lost like one or two matches, like the same. And next up we have AS, a legend of the scene. Maybe some of you might know his videos from like 10 years ago showing the very first no matches. And anyway, he's back and he plays a really unique and I would say even revolutionary playstyle that is still picking up steam right now, and I think he's one of the only players in the world who uses a formation that is not F middle block, which is really interesting, really fun, and he makes it work very, very well. And the thing is, a lot of players around the world have started realizing the strengths of his playstyle, and therefore people are starting to realize the counters to his playstyle, which I'm not sure how he will counter the counters, but it'll be quite exciting to see. And we have Infi, who is considered by many as maybe the best player in the world in terms of raw knowledge and skill. When you see him play at his best, it looks just flawless, beautiful. It's like poetry. But currently, it appears that he's not as invincible as he used to be. Honestly, he plays very unique. He plays really, really slow and methodical, and so it will be interesting how he can maybe perhaps regain his form, or maybe go to reach another level, if that's even possible. It'd be quite exciting. And Mia, on the other hand, is like the polar opposite of Infi. He is very fast and aggressive, kind of like how French players play. And although he used to dominate the international scene together with Parali, he would always battle for first place against Parali in majors. He has not been so dominant throughout this year, and some people have even considered him to have fallen off. Raufuro has won one major a long time ago, and I don't think he has shown up to the same degree ever since. He's still strong, but I think just on paper he might be considered the least frightening member of Japan. So although yes, they are still extremely strong, I think their overall strength is not as strong as France this year. And then we have Latin America, a Seed 3 team. It's a solid roster with a lot of familiar names. We have Rodrift, also known as Rodrigo in the past. He was a high level player back then, but he has not been very active in the past year or so. So again, unknown how good he is now. And Dante, who is basically Rodri's student, never really established himself as a top player, just like his teacher. And he's also been quite inactive. But he does play quite similarly to Rodrift, so it'll be quite interesting to see if he still maintains that playstyle or if he's gone on a path on his own. Killian is relatively newer to the scene, and he has been rising up the ranks slowly, but he hasn't had any breakout performance yet. But I think he can take games off of the majority of other Seed 3 players. Space Genesis, I believe, was quite active around a year ago. He did not really stand out much though, so I'm not sure what to expect. Finally, we have Zeno, who is likely their strongest player. He has remained active throughout recent times and is a really formidable player, having made solid finishes at quite a lot of tournaments. Overall, I think Latin America is actually the strongest Seed 3 team with a more well-rounded roster than the other Seed 3s. Such as Bulgaria, for example. And then we have Maghreb, a Seed 1 team, who I actually consider to be the other dark horse aside from China. And as the captain, we have Selo here, and he's arguably at the level of Alexis and Azik, if not just slightly below them, which is still really, really scary. Abdel is another formidable player, although not as decorated as maybe Selo. He has shown some strong results in the past, and I think he definitely is one of the stronger members of Maghreb. And Luxi was maybe considered one of the strongest players in the world in the past, but has since become inactive in tournaments. Rumor has it he might still be in form without playing in tournaments, but regardless, he should be feared by even the best players. This was the guy who took down, I believe, was it Parali back during the vanilla days to win the whole tournament. It was crazy. And Penguin is also strong, one of the few top francophone players with a distinctly different playstyle in my opinion. He plays quite differently, and I won't spoil it obviously, but you can as viewers we can probably see how different he plays from his other teammates. And Saikyo was perhaps the least threatening player on this team. He's definitely not as decorated as all the others, but I think he can still be a pretty reliable sub against weaker teams. But other than that, players are all from the francophone community, so basically playstyles are mostly similar to that of France's players actually. So you can see a lot of similarities in the way they play, the way they attack and defend. Next up we have Poland, who are a Seed 3 team, and Poland is basically Cobrex and friends, similar to Bulgaria, but probably even more of a one-man show. And there was a previous Polish team in the previous World Cup, and from that team, Koprek and Krecik from the previous were from that team. And like I mentioned, Kobrex is the ace, and he's a relatively old player, and I think in recent times he has been on the rise, and he is a pretty solid player now. Well, he was always a solid player, but even more so. Krecik, on the other hand, I think has been inactive since the last World Cup, so maybe he's still getting back up to level. I'm not sure. I hope so. And the rest are basically unknown. All in all, I think Cobrex really needs to carry hard, and then somebody else has to step up here. I'm sure one of them will step up if they want to have a chance to get out of groups. And next up we have Portugal. We're entering more Seed 4 territory here. Portugal is almost nothing is known about them, honestly, and because of that there aren't really any expectations on them, and I think on most people's predictions and tier lists they are actually right at the bottom. Foxy is probably the only player that I know personally. He's played, I've seen him several times in matchmaking, but their level is just completely unknown. They could come out swinging and beat out a Seed 2 team for all I know, and honestly I would be absolutely happy to see that happen. Next up we have Southeast Asia, which is my team actually, but I will still comment on this team from an outsider's view. Bam is probably a mid-level player, honestly, just decent results in tournaments overall, but nothing really special. But just like Caleb, he also loves to play really spicy off-meta picks and strange team compositions. You never know what you're gonna get. Min is absolutely unknown, that's it. Zuki played for Germany last World Cup, but he can represent Southeast Asia due to Vietnamese heritage, and he has been largely inactive since that previous World Cup. And so his level is also quite unknown, just like Min. So actually this Southeast Asia depends on how strong Min and Zuki are, because Bum can maybe grab a few wins against some of the weaker players, depending on the matchup of course, but in the end I think they are one of the weaker Seed 4 teams together with Portugal. And then we have our last Seed 4 team here in Spain, and I think they are very underrated. They're the most underrated team. People really just doubt them. They think they're just going to be a joke. I think they have the potential to really show up big time. Their results in tournaments have all been really lackluster, those who have joined tournaments, so it's understandable the general public perception towards them. But at the same time, some Spanish players have been on the rise. Specifically, there's one player who is actually not on this roster by the name of Jesus. I think he is really, really strong, and he will keep getting stronger, especially for such a newer player to the scene. And the fact that he's not here gives me hope that, you know, all of these other players are maybe around his level, even if they're a bit weaker than him. It's still a force to be reckoned with. And the other player I wanted to mention is, this time he is in the roster, Jorge, I'm not sure, I'm sorry if I'm butchering your name, like just completely. But he has had unfortunate matchups in tournaments, meeting very difficult opponents, so his results have never been really good. But I played him myself in one of the tournaments, and he is really skilled, and he has a lot of potential, very consistent player. And I actually think that they are the strongest Seed 4 team. Not much is known about these, I don't really know much about the rest of these players, and they haven't been really stand out in tournaments. So let's hope they can all prove the doubters wrong and show up big time, especially in their opening match against France actually this Wednesday. And finally, our final team, Subsaharan Africa, which is a Seed 2 team. And all of these members are also from the Francophone community, just like Maghreb, and Kinun, Eth, and Kevnox are probably the main strongest core, and they have been showing up big time these last few months. Eth in particular has been beating the likes of Alexis and AS from Japan, placing very high and even first places in major tournaments. Kinun and Kevnox are probably about the same level. They're both really strong, and both of them are showing up really big time. Recently taking down some pretty big names, and so it'll be exciting what these three can do. On the other hand, we have Banania, who recently started appearing again, but I'm not sure of his level. Hasn't been appearing much in tournaments either, so it's hard to gauge his strength. And Straw is kind of more of a community manager, I guess, but he's still a strong player in his own right. But still, I think it's not at the level of the core 3 of East, Kevnox, and Kino. And I actually think they have the potential to make big upsets, and an argument could even be made for them to be Seed 1 with their current form. I actually think they might even reach semifinals at this rate. And that concludes my team preview for the World Cup. Don't forget, the start of the tournament is on the 12th of July, this Wednesday, between France and Spain, and it will continue all the way until the 30th of July, where the grand finals will be held. And if you want to get more up-to-date news on the schedule and the fixtures, and just the general progression of the World Cup, don't forget to join the Discord server that I have linked in the description, and also follow the Twitter account of the organizers. See you there.